It was a very ambitious setup for Sunday morning, last day of an amazing conference with a lot of partying too. So if you don't mind coming closer, and you are free to leave when you want to, we won't be offended, but it just helps us talk to you. So good morning. I'm Lily Kharrazi. I am moderating today. I have a little bit of a cold, so this shaky voice is due to that. You're not so scary. Okay, so you are in the session Reviving Traditional Arts as Community Activism. It's a little bit of a problematic title, and we're going to refer to that in a bit. But what does it mean? What does it mean when you want to invigorate, sometimes revive a practice? What does it mean to practice cultural expressions that may have been dormant for historical neglect, for absent narratives, for being somewhat opposed to mainstream? We're certainly living in a time when these issues are very, very much elevated. The rhetoric is extremely intense. And at the same time, while this has been a historical truth in many ways, there is a tremendous amount of activity in cultural expressions. How can we support and this reconnection? And how can we view this as truly, truly one of the strongest political acts of our time? So we are 3 participants. We're going to be speaking from several different points of view, but there are some good connecting threads here. Julie Garreau, who yesterday, if you were at the session, the Red Can Project received a wonderful prize. And we have with us Lisa Castellanos, who's an activist artist based in Oakland, California. And I am a program manager with ACTA, the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, and I'm going to be talking sort of about the infrastructure that helps to support this kind of work after we identify this kind of work. So let me get a scan in the room. How many of you are practicing cultural expression, something rooted in your cultural communities? Okay, so let's just do this popcorn style if you don't mind. What do you practice?
I practice Kung Fu, traditional Chinese Kung Fu, and also pick up my teacher's Native American, so he's actually teaching the Native American flute, strangely enough. Totally outside Kung Fu, but he's a really amazing guy.
Not a strange story, not a strange occurrence. Erica. Exactly. The Griffina culture, it has been designated by the United Nations as one of our cultural treasures to be safeguarded. Anybody else? Beautiful. From where? Really interesting. Okay, the archaeology of practice tradition through the internet. Okay, really good. How many of you in your organizations are supporting traditional or folk arts as part of your funding, part of your, okay, loud and proud, yes, hooray. All right, so what are traditional arts? This is always the question. And so the definition that we are going to rely on today, traditional arts are those practices that emanate from a group of people with shared values, shared aesthetics possibly, could be a common language, could be a shared place, it could be membership in ethnicity, it could be membership in race, religion. It could be an occupational pursuit. So traditional arts can range from, here in California, from the intimate learning of learning basketry from your native California basketry. And it could also mean voguing. So we also consider the voguing house and ball communities that are based in Los Angeles, who are based in houses, who have their own clothing, who have their own aesthetics, who have their own language, also within the purview of traditional arts. So it's a very wide and big variety, culturally specific work for some of you. So we're, I think as a field, we're all trying to find the right language. And so for today, we're going to be talking about some very rooted cultural practices that I think are also in your communities. So welcome, everyone. If you don't mind, come on forward. We're going to begin our presentation. We were unable to get everybody's bio, and so let me quickly introduce to you, and then we'll get going with our presentation. And I would like you to also feel free at any point to raise your hand and participate and talk to us, ask us questions. Julie is our executive director of the Cheyenne River Youth Project in South Dakota. She's a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and as the executive director of the Youth Project, she has been there since its inception in 1988. She began working with the organization full-time in 2000, and through this project, she has seen exhilarating development from a tiny one-room youth center in a former Main Street bar to a comprehensive youth and family services organization. And we're going to be learning about the youth. Okay, she's a graduate of South Dakota's Huron University. And Julie, am I leaving anything out? There's a longer bio for you to look at. Yeah, it's good enough. Okay. Lisa Marie Castellanos is the founder of Taller Girasol, which, please tell us what that is.
Taller Girasol in Spanish is Grabando Resistencias por medio del arte y de la solidaridad, which in English is engraving resistance through art and solidarity.
Yeah, and beautifully rendered because I don't speak Spanish. I didn't want to attempt that. She's also on the advisory board member of Transnational Villages Network, TVN, which is a binational network of indigenous communities of origin across 5 states of Mexico and their diaspora communities living in the United States. And we see, located really at this nexus of real political activity, organizing through traditional arts activities, and so we'll be hearing from her as well. She's been involved in and worked in social justice organizations for close to 25 years, and we will put this on the website afterwards so you can learn more about Lisa's work. And Lisa's also a practicing artist, and can you tell us what your medium is?
I am a printmaker.
Microphone.
I'm a printmaker, and I also work with multiple mediums like embroidery, textiles, with different forms of printmaking.
Thank you. And I'm Lily Kharrazi. I'm a program manager with the Alliance for California Traditional Arts. There's some materials on the tables for you, and I'm asking you to take them back to your California communities because we're in our open grants season. And besides being a funder, which is direct support to artists, we also provide programs. One of them, which may be coming to you, is the Sounds of California, where we're collecting the soundscapes of the communities that make this state a very rich one. We'll talk about that later, and my bio will be up as well. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start. Julie, would you like to introduce to us what we are going to see?
Sure. Good morning, everybody, and also let me give you props for coming because Sunday morning. So thank you for that. We're talking about traditional arts and community activism, and so one of the things I wanted to share with you was our Red Can Graffiti Jam, which is about 9 minutes. But I think that it kind of embraces everything that's happening on reservations or in Indian country. I think that when we talk about reviving traditional arts, that's kind of not accurate because I think we've always been practicing. It's always been there. There were times in our history through, the assimilation eras and all those different eras where they tried to, get rid of us or take us off reservations and do those sorts of things that, when they said, well, you couldn't practice your religions and you couldn't pray the way you pray and you couldn't do those things, I think we just went underground and we found different ways to do it. And then also the transition over time, when you think about the arts and, in Lakota, there's actually no word for art because in our world, art that you might see it as art is actually our life way. It's just the way we are. So when you see our regalia and you see those sorts of things, it's just being Lakota. So when you see this video today, I think that people see it as very special, and I do too. I think Red Can Graffiti Jam has brought some amazing energy to our community, has enlightened the world about what's happening. But again, it's also, number one, it's another youth program, something that we administer. It's also community development. It's also just a really, really strong way of loving our community by bringing this. And we have a lot of dilapidated buildings and that aren't being used or they're abandoned. So, we turned them into this great community mural project, but we woven into this project our traditions and our dances and those sorts of things. So I really do want to show you the jam, and I'm hoping that when you're done, you'll kind of get what I'm talking about in terms of, the way we may have done things where we would have painted on buffalo robes and those sorts of things. We're painting. It's, we opened this graffiti park. It's called Wainia Tuawapi, which actually means winter count in Lakota. So through that, we're still living our culture very much and showing it, but in a very different sort of way. So if you don't mind watching with me, that would be really great. If this is something that will make a difference in one of our children's lives, then we're doing the right thing. It is a graffiti jam, but it's kind of a very different kind of graffiti jam. It's completely 100% all week long, just giving, giving, giving. It's about Eagle Butte, South Dakota. It's about Cheyenne River Reservation. It's about the kids in my community.
Red Can really came about as a celebration for the youth, to get youth inspired to think bigger, to dream larger, and help the youth to express some of the things that they need to express. But if there is something that they can express for a time that helps them cross that bridge, that helps them get over that day, get over that week, get over that month, or get over that year from some issues that they might be having, that's a success.
Opportunities like this just help them realize the power that's already within them, because these children are powerful. They're already powerful. We can't give them power, they have it. Our job is to just remind them and show them how to use it. And Red Can and art, expressing yourself and being able to use your voice is just another way to remind them how powerful they are.
This is the real deal when it comes to community, art, and identity. Graffiti is just a way to reappropriate our environment, mainly the places where we live and our characters and decoration and embellishment, but essentially traditional, classic, let's say, letter-based graffiti is taking your name and making it beautiful. You don't need a PhD to see how that can help your image, to see the name that you've chosen for yourself looking beautiful.
Graffiti is one of the largest widespread art movements in history. It was born in the US, which is also rare. There aren't a lot of art forms that are born in the US, but most importantly, this art form was born of the youth. The main artists who started this all were kids in troubled areas like the South Bronx through some of its worst times, this art and all of this beauty came out of that. That immediately translates to troubled youth worldwide. It just has that soul, it has that essence.
Art is so important because it heals the soul. It creates new beginnings, new pathways, new journeys, new vision. What I've seen graffiti and street art do for kids especially, I know what it did for me. As soon as I saw it, it was just completely inspired. When I see kids come up to my wall and they want to talk to me and they want to grab my paint and they want to learn about painting, it's awesome to see that same curiosity and amazement and just awe.
Pray for the ones listening right now, struggling, feel like giving it right now. I pray for you, pray that you come back home. I pray that you understand that you're never alone. I pray
for the Red Can Jam to be here. It's like a Native American hip hop jam that was like something that I've been waiting for it to come my way, and it's really, really exciting.
The four elements of hip hop, which include rapping and DJing and graffiti and breakdancing, all that stuff's happening here. And I think the special part about it is that the Lakota culture is being infused in it. I think artistic expression is just it's a healing thing. Art's been used in Lakota culture forever. For kids to come here and to get connected, I think that's one thing that's really important for us to show them, is that there's a lot of outlets to express themselves, that they don't have to try to drown it out in substances and stuff. There's a lot of ways to heal, to express yourself, and there's people here that are willing to teach them how to do that.
So that's where graffiti took me. It took me to a place that I'd never known before. And it offered what I didn't have to begin with. It offered a sense of commitment to myself and understanding that I could do something, be it just putting the word love on the wall.
I like to paint outside because the people are outside. Painting outside is me making an impact in someone else's life.
Whether it's about the buffalo and the man praying, whether it's about the Lakota values, Turtle Island and our creation story, so much of us are reflected in a really powerful way all throughout town. Seeing those murals instills pride in how I feel about my indigenousness, about being a Lakota woman.
The art of graffiti, it's so abducting and intoxicating. People get around it, and it's this thing, it's like, look how much energy and power, and the people just get involved with it, and it just takes over. And then when people see what's possible, they see the artistic form that comes out of that, and they go, wow, I didn't know that was possible.
Okay. So I hate to stop it, the artwork is incredibly beautiful, but let's have some questions from you and for Julie. Yeah.
Yes. It's in about a week and a half, so come on over. Well, it wasn't intended to be. I think so our arts program really took off about 3 years ago, and our tribal government had given me this plot of land, about 3.5 acres, and I about then had encountered graffiti, and so I'd brought some graffiti education classes to our town and some artists, and they did a community mural, and I really watched how the community kind of embraced that. All the community murals are very culturally relevant, so that's kind of one of the things that we ask of you if you're going to come and paint in our community. In the graffiti park, you can do what you do, but in the community, the murals really have to be very reflective of our culture. So you'll see stories about Turtle Island, the creation story, all these different things. White Buffalo Calf Woman, and those are all very sacred stories for us, so now you just see them in a really big way. There had been a lot of tagging and vandalism on these old buildings. The interesting thing is that there's nothing that happens to these murals now. They've embraced them completely, and you won't even see pen marks. You won't see anything on them. They love them because it's a reflection of who we are. And I think that speaks to what has happened to our people throughout the years, where trying to break us, trying to assimilate us, trying to make us one of it like everybody else. And I think that we see that on those walls now, and we can kind of say, yeah, that's a good reminder of who we are. So I think the interesting part about the graffiti piece is that that's typically murals go up and they come down fairly quickly. With ours, they don't want them to go away. And of course, we're in a small town, so there's very few buildings to paint. So, you know, we do have to take them down. We leave them up for about a year, but people don't want them to go away. They've just embraced everything that we're doing. Introducing graffiti was a little risky at first. You know, we had a couple grandparents who came to see us and said, you know, you're teaching my kids how to vandalize. But so we said, come see the class, come watch us. And they're like, okay, we get it. So, you know, we had to go through those phases. But, I mean, all in all, I think the first year, you know, Indian reservation in South Dakota, most people didn't know what a graffiti jam was. So now the third year, people are getting really excited. They're anxious for it to come back. People are offering me their buildings where they before were like, nah, I don't think so. So I think it's really changing. So originally, it was just something that I thought, I want that for my community, so we're going to do it. It was 1 year, and in about 2 weeks, we'll have our third annual, and it appears we're doing a strategic plan for it. So apparently, it's going to be around for a while. So you'll have your chance. Yes.
Something I get curious about, and I know some folks are doing this through technology, but are you guys tracking at all people's digital interactions with these murals, like selfies in front of it, or posting it in certain ways with their own comments?
Well, we have our own, we have, of course, Instagram accounts, and we have a Facebook account and that sort of thing. We capture a lot of video, a lot of photos. We try to get feedback. I think one of the things that I was convinced we have to do now is a strategic plan for Red Can singly. So I think that those are some of the questions and things that we're going to evolve into and work towards. Again, you know, this is our third one, and it kind of took off, and it's on a trajectory I didn't expect. So it's a really good surprise. But I think those are all pieces that we're working towards. And then, of course, we have an internship program where the kids are, we just launched the Lakota Youth Arts Institute. So graffiti education and all the cultural arts, all those continue to be a big piece of that. So I think more and more, you know, as we evolve. Yes, thank you.
What was the buy-in like? Just like you were saying, some of the businesses are now wanting them to put up the murals. How was that initial first year, just kind of selling it out to the businesses, those people that wanted to partner with you or didn't want to kind of convince them?
Well, there were no businesses that were actually operating that were involved. They were all buildings that had been abandoned and were just left, probably going to be torn down at some point. So we got permission from the owners, so there wasn't really a question of that. This year, because some people have asked that we leave some of the murals up, like you saw the one, the Turtle Island Creation Story and the Wokichie, the prayer, those are staying up because they're so, they're so big and they're so bold, and as you come into town, it's the first thing you see. So they've asked that we leave that, but those are buildings that are actually being, they're inhabited, they're being used for businesses. A lot of the buildings belong to tribal government, who's a strong supporter of what we do. So sometimes we just had to go see one person, and then they would give us permission. Some of the building owners, they have very specific things they want painted. Like one guy, you know, he said, "Oh, I want a cowboy chasing a cow, and I want an Indian, you know, shooting a buffalo." So that's something I think you'd have to commission to get that done. So we don't do that. But I think it's just, I think they had to kind of see and wait, and I think they thought it was just going to be like something, you know, more vandalism. And again, our project isn't any sort of abatement program. That wasn't what it was intended to be. We just love our community. We love our kids. We love our community, and we wanted to lift everybody up. And we had the capacity to do so. So we reached out, and it was fairly easy. But you know, again, we only had 8 artists, and now I have 13, and more people just keep wanting to come. So I don't know what I'll do if I run out of buildings. So I've built some walls because we're pretty flat. We have no trees. So we've kind of had to create our landscape too.
Yeah, one more question. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Well, you don't want me. I'm not an artist, but I know a lot of other great artists. One of the really great things this year that I'm really happy about is, you know, when we first got into it, I knew one artist who introduced me to a couple of artists. And now I have 13 artists coming. Over half of them are indigenous. So they're Yaqui, Odom, Lakota, Taino, they're Cherokee, they're all from all over. And that's really been my goal, is to bring more indigenous artists to my community, because that's who we are. So. Sure, absolutely. It's pretty simple. It's LakotaYouth.org, LakotaYouth.org, Lakota Youth, and it would be at the end of the video if you wanted to.
Okay. We will come back to more of this discussion. Julie, just last question. How are you funded for this?
Well, Cheyenne River Youth Project, which is the overall organization, we're fairly large, so we're very diverse. We also have youth centers, teen centers. We have sustainable ag, social enterprise. So we like to have a coffee shop and a 2.5-acre garden. We have a lot happening. The arts piece of it, we were very fortunate. And when we started out, we were funded with an NEA Our Town grant. We received one small private grant, and since then, NEA has been a great supporter of us. We received an Art Place America grant last year, with a 3-year grant. South Dakota Arts Council just recently helped us. So everybody seems to be seeing the beauty of what we're trying to do, and they all want to help us out.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to now turn this over to Lisa to guide us through.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing the project. I want to see the video to the very end. So again, my name is Lisa Maria Castellanos. I am a local artist based here in Oakland. I'm the founder of Taller Girasol, or Studio Girasol, which is a community-based arts project that works with young people to introduce printmaking as not only an avenue to express themselves, but as possible vocation path for them. And we're very tiny, and we're, right now we're just happy with the size that we are. I'm also on the advisory board of a much larger enterprise called the Transnational Villages Network. I'm the West Coast advisor. The Transnational Villages Network is actually an impulse that has decades of work, of desire, of stories behind it. The Transnational Villages Network is a sister organization here in the United States with another organization or another network in Mexico, which is the Asamblea Popular de Familias Migrantes, or in English, the People's Assembly of Migrant, the People's Assembly of Migrant Families. And the People's Assembly of Migrant Families is a network of collectives, of artisan collectives, mostly from indigenous communities in Mexico. The Mexican colonial system was one that basically that didn't set up a reservation system, but however isolated communities in pockets of poverty, neglect, and just like, as we would say in Spanish, olvido. They're just there. What has happened in the past 20, 30 years is the global push of forces that force people to leave their communities of origin, to migrate to the United States, to work, has created a situation where generations are separated from their elders. They become separated from language. Once you get separated from language, you adopt new practices, you leave traditions behind, traditions that have to do with, as you were saying, creating the everyday artifacts and articles that help your day, help the, that are just part of the community. And so the idea behind the Transnational Villages Network is to support the work of the APOFAM in Mexico, which spans 5 states right now. And the idea is to answer the question of how do communities resist and face the reality that, given the political environment and the current administration, it's very likely that they'll never see their family members again, right? Mothers, elder women will never see their sons who maybe left when they were teenagers. Maybe now that there's technology where you can see video, but you'll never touch your child. You'll never meet your grandchildren in person. And so the idea was that if communities could look beyond the politics and turn to culture as a source of healing, but not only as a source of power, perhaps that could be a vehicle that could reunite families. And so with that imagination, the APOFAM began to work with communities of artisans, mostly women, because many of the migratory forces pushes men and young men to leave their communities of origin. And they have come up with a brilliant strategy that uses art and culture as a way to subvert the political mechanisms that divide the families, in this case, immigration law, politics of the border, politics of the other and who belongs and who doesn't belong. And they have been able to develop this strategy where as cultural ambassadors for their communities that are very rooted in indigenous language, whether it's Nahuatl or Zapotec or Mixtec, they're able to apply for visas to come to the U.S. But it's not that simple, right? The work needs to be rooted in diaspora communities, and it has to be sponsored by entities, universities, local governments. You need a lot of paperwork to be able to get a visa. So maybe we can change the slide. They're mostly pictures. Yeah. And so the idea of the Transnational Villages Network is to highlight the fact that these traditions, whether it's basket weaving or music or dance, language even, wood carving, doesn't need to be revitalized. It needs to be reintroduced to diaspora communities who've been separated, who've been forced apart. And so it's like a relative coming home in many ways when they do finally meet each other again in the airport, when they're able to come into the United States, participate in festivals. It's not only meeting their grandmother or seeing their mother again, but it's a relative of tradition that they get to be introduced to again. And realize that communities are vital and vibrant in their communities of origin. And it has an amazing impact on diaspora communities, especially the young people here that have, in the US, that have maybe grown up without their native language. Now they speak English, maybe a little Spanish, and none of the indigenous language anymore. It gives them an opportunity to explore a new part of their identity. So as I mentioned, the Transnational Villages Network is right now based in 5 states in Mexico. All indigenous communities: Puebla, Oaxaca, Guerrero, Tlaxcala, Mexico City, and Chiapas. And in the US, we're working with diaspora communities on Staten Island, Hartford, Connecticut, Oakland, and Los Angeles. One of the most amazing examples of this idea that culture could be a vehicle to reunite families and reintroduce cultural traditions to diaspora communities is a festival that happens in New York called New York Tlan. Tlan in Nahuatl means land. And so it's often added to different regionals, just different locations to mark it as like territory or land. So calling New York Tlan is a way to reclaim, for diaspora communities in New York to claim that this is where we belong here too. We're from there, but we're also from here. New York Tlan is a festival, and it's last year successfully completed its third year, where communities, performers, artists from those states that I mentioned were able to acquire cultural visas with a lot of work, a lot of paperwork on that end in Mexico, a lot of paperwork on this end, and participate in this festival that their communities here organized. So New York Tlan has become an opportunity for diaspora communities to become active. They have to go to the entities in New York, in their cities, to request for documents, for letters of invitation. They have to become active. They have to learn how to organize an event that will showcase best their cultures, the vibrancy and vitality of the art. And so this was 2 years ago, New York Tlan Festival. What's amazing is that over 90 women, mostly elder women, have been able to get their cultural visa to travel to the US to participate in a fully supported festival. And their first time they've ever, for many of them, that they've ever left their village and come, much less come to the United States and present the beauty of what they do every day, whether it's food or baskets or hats. They've also been reunited with their family. These are pictures from the airport when they arrive, and their family is there to welcome them. There's video that we weren't able to get, which would have been, I think, more impactful for you to see the video of the tears and the words, hear the words and just the emotion when the unbelievable happens, where they've been able to be reunited and have been able to do that through something that many people feel is just not valued, which is the artesanía, the culture, the everyday things that they make have become the vehicle where when everything else failed. Right? So these are just a couple more slides. Yeah. So that's it.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, let's have some questions before we move on.
Yes.
Prince.
So I presume that they're largely grant funded, and that is the grants individual, or what's the funding model?
The funding model is there's some grants in the Mexican government provides some funding for cultural development. But usually they fund so that in Mexico, the particular regions specialize in certain art forms. So in Puebla, in Teopantlan, making this kind of basketry is what everybody does. You go to San Martín Tilcajete in Oaxaca, it's wood carvings, right? So it's very specialized by region. And the Mexican government has a program to encourage people to do that, but to do that to feed the tourist industry. And so there's some funding there to help provide materials, provide some workshops. It's not meant for any real agency. It's like, hey, I help the tourist industry. They purchase the crafts at very, very little, put them in expensive tourist gift shops, and then they ramp up the price. And that's just part of the economy in Mexico. Right now, the way that the New York Tlan Festival happens is families, the relatives of people, the artisans, they fundraise. They get local dollars from the city of New York, other small foundations. They raise money to put on the festival. They do fundraisers to pay for the air travel, to pay for the consular fees to get the documents to come into the United States. It's very grassroots supported.
Francis.
Is there a comparable
That's a great question. And so after this third year of testing the model, right, so to speak, in New York on the East Coast, the desire is to bring it to California. Khalifa Aslan or something festival. There's a strong possibility that we will pilot something this year in Oakland. There is a strong concentration of people from Garreau in East Oakland that have 10 to 20 years of since they've migrated, which means they haven't seen family in that long. And so, but most people have family in Southern California, in LA, so there likely will be. We're not sure what will happen in the current administration. There's a lot of uncertainty, but when I was in Mexico in March, touring and visiting the different villages, and we asked them, because everybody's very aware of what's happening here in the United States, and they're very aware of what it means for to have the current administration that we have. And they are not going to give up. They're sticking to their plan. They're gonna continue to practice, and they're going to attempt to come for the 4th New York Tlan. If they're able to enter, we will bring them to California for a small event in the fall. Yeah, we're not sure what'll happen though.
One more question. Okay. You know, I was very struck by the leadership system, and the leadership system is one that's been replicated here, but was also in the villages. So maybe can you say something a little bit more about who's in leadership and how does that get transferred here?
So the leadership model is it's a network based. It started in Mexico with they call them clubs of folks that were receiving small amounts of resource from the local government to learn how to make a basket or make a certain number of baskets to to sell back to the government so they can be put into the tourist economy. The model that is determined by the artisans, and working in collective is the model that is desired, because once you start to operate as an individual, everything sort of unzips in terms of the bigger picture, the power of art and culture to traverse borders, to reunite with family. That's the almost like once people start to think as individuals and not as the collective, as the community, then it's not possible to bring the group from a particular village to the consulate to then talk about representing the regional art and language. That similar model has been adopted here in the United States because diaspora communities tend to, they all have an interest to make the festival happen, so they have to work together. So they work in committee as well. We have a monthly conference call with folks from here in the United States and the folks in Mexico who have access to the technology to continue to emphasize the importance of working as a collective and moving together. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. I'm really struck by as I go into my presentation, I'm really struck by two things. I love how Julie's repeated, she says, we love our communities. I mean, we love our communities. It's just that basic, right? That's it. And Lisa, you're talking about such an intimacy of families, So it's this idea of collectiveness that really, really permeates this work, which also permeates the leadership styles, the decision making that's happening. And I think it's a really perfect segue to talk about some of the work that we're doing at the Alliance for California Traditional Arts. And we're a bit of a hybrid organization in that we provide direct services through our grants, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to try to create sort of a framework of how we might approach working with cultural communities using California as sort of our test basis, and there's a real reason. How many people do not live in California? Okay, welcome to California. Tlan, can I say that? Without appropriating that? Okay. Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, lovely panelists. So I'd like to share with you, I'd like to share with you some ideas that are illuminating our work. We're a funder, I said. We're also an advocate. We're a provider of resources for this sector. And since 1997, which makes us 20 years old this year, ACTA came about because a group of concerned artists, practitioners, advocates, and academics came together to address the lack of funding for folk and traditional arts. So many of you in your states have a state folklorist. We are an organization that is basically aligned with the California Arts Council. We do not have a state folklorist. We are as close to that as possible. And some of our founders are here and board members who are here. Libby Maynard, if you don't know her, Ink People Inc., Eureka. She was at that meeting and sort of very grateful to your continued guidance in this field. And Islama Artudiouf is here. He's our new board member, so please, these are wonderful people with great ideas. So that was the seed of the organization. Came out of crisis, really. So as a nonprofit, we have been able to seed, and I really think of it as microfinancing because small bits of money seem to go so far in the kinds of projects and communities as a sense of acknowledgement. And the acknowledgement sometimes is what fuels, tripling, doubling that money with great, great volunteerism and love of community. And certainly that's not to endorse or say, just give this sector a little bit of money, but I'm saying that little bit of money has had such ripple effects. So we also provide technical assistance, and we convene culture bearers together to discuss issues of interest, share art, and to encourage networks. Okay, whoops, I've gone backwards. All right, so this is who we are. I just said that. And actually, here we have the Garreau community in Los Angeles, and an example of a community that had not ever written a grant before and actually came to us. We worked together, and now you have a California Arts Council, expanded programs. The idea here was to support language and storytelling in its very early years. When I went to a site visit, there was a tiny, tiny iMac computer, a microphone, and language classes were being broadcast, internationally. So the impact of small and the impact of large. So let me introduce you to, oops, I keep going backwards, sorry folks. Here's some really, really selected curated facts. We're the 6th largest world economy. We're home to the largest Native American tribal population in the US. The map that you're seeing up here is not counties, but these are actually California Indian tribal groups. And if this was a different map, if I put California native languages, there'd be over 200 languages. And the reason that I chose this map is because to drive home a point of, our realities, our ways of knowing are so, so different depending on what your vantage point is. And so, it's a way of understanding that as we traverse this very, very large state, the 6th largest world economy, there's a different way to look at place, wherever you are in your state, depending who you are. We're already that minority majority state, 20 years ahead of the rest of the country, they say. We're probably beyond 27% immigrants. And English is followed by Spanish, Cantonese, Mandarin, Tagalog. Oh, don't have my directions. So here I'm just going to touch upon some ideas that we work with in helping to sustain, not revive, because we don't think traditional arts are dead. They've never been dead. They are in need of sustaining. So to sustain memory and practice, and here we have an example of a mother and a daughter, Ofelia Esparza, Rosana Esparza, and she's now in her 80s and still creating really extraordinary works of altares, which have become, commercialized, we know that. Sustaining memory and practice again. The Omnira projects in Oakland, California created Juneteenth Altar, connecting roots of African-based spiritual practice to historic events. And where they have taken their practice is now they go right directly into the streets in locations where there have been murders and police actions, and to be able to take their spiritual practices as witnesses, as a comfort to the community, to the families, with the families' permission. And they're based in the Lukumi, African-based Yoruba tradition. Sustaining ways of knowing, which I referred to in the map. So how do people perceive what's important to them? So here we have Familia Cepeda, who came from Puerto Rico to be in residence to help diaspora community continue sustaining ways of knowing. And really what this is about is that to revive things that have been dormant for so long is to really be political, to say we are here, we exist. And here we have a 200-year dormancy from the coming of age ceremonies and being able to practice the brush dance to create the regalia you see before you. To be able to do that after 200 years is so profound. And then lastly, a few years ago, we were able to support the Tibetan Opera in its full, almost 2-day iteration. And going to a Tibetan opera, you come, you picnic, you hang out, you laugh, you cry, it's all of that. But we have here in the United States, those Tibetan artists who were trained by, under the auspices of the Dalai Lama, all of them born outside of Tibet. They learned their craft, and artistry was honed in India, and they've come to the United States, and this happened in the 70s. They were able to bring together all of the master artists in the United States for their 2-day Tibetan opera, the first time that it was performed. So again, local in all of your communities has tremendous, tremendous binational global implications. It's not small. Intimate is not small. And finally, I just want to end, and this is really kind of going back to our indigenous Mexican community members. And here is an incredible act of using cultural arts and cultural expressions to create a strong statement. This is at the Tijuana border. On one side, the participants of Son Jarocho, which is song, dance, improvisation, songs that are improvised, in this case, to talk about the political situation. They are dancing together. They set up a small tarima, a small stage, where the dancer with percussive heels will be the percussion. And they're singing to each other through this border fence. And here you can see how small that little window is. And I think this is a really, really good way to end sustainability. Sustaining these practices fosters innovation. Thank you. Okay. So, questions for anybody? Comments? You don't even have to have a question. What are you doing? Yes. We'll go here and there.
My question was about the red can, and there's some really great traditional wearing clothes. I saw some movements that are pretty cool. I saw some hip-hop movements. So where's the intersection there of maintaining tradition and innovating tradition? Is that a challenge for any of the panelists? How do the works that you guys create try to foster and cultivate something and not change it, whereas allowing a new generation to come in and change it if they want or add to it?
Well, what I can say about that is that I think that throughout our history, as far as our customs and ceremonies, you know, the reality of what's happened to us has changed us. So like I said kind of earlier is that, you know, where a long time ago we might have painted on buffalo robes and that sort of thing and teepees, I think what you'll see throughout our history from colonization when it began, you'll see that we've been very adaptive. We've had to be. So, you know, as our resources were taken, as the buffalo were killed, as we lost access, we painted something else. Or we created our, you know, where we made our buffalo robes for our blankets and how we covered ourselves. Now we make star quilts. So I think that there's so many ways that we've had to adapt because we've lost access. But I think that what we're doing now is maintaining our culture or making sure it remains a part of everything that we do. But the reality is, you know, in terms of our work with youth are everywhere. They're on the internet. They see all these things. So we're just blending them and bringing them back together. So we're doing on the side, which you don't see here in Red Can, but you'll see in our art classes. Jerica is one of my coworkers. She organizes a lot of the classes for quill work. You recently did something, I can't remember what everything else. They've been so busy, but they've done, what else have you done? Quill work? But so they're really busy on the side with these different kinds of classes that they're also doing. So I think that, you know, what we're doing is kind of a very contemporary way of an old tradition, which is, you know, so we have the teepees, we have the dancing. We're also sharing our culture because it's a festival. People are coming to see, and we want to share that because I think that that's also part of how we make sure that we retain our culture and that we still have access to it by sharing it. And I don't know if that explains it at all, but I think that people need to be educated about who we are. And because for so long, I mean, it's really unsettling when somebody tells me they didn't even know Indians exist anymore, or, you know, but I'm like, but we do. It's very clear we do. So, you know, I think that making sure that we're also ambassadors and sharing our culture, we don't want you to appropriate it. We don't want you to go and sell our headdresses. We don't want that happening. And it happens plenty, but we want you to know that we're still here. And it's, in fact, it's a huge part of our power to make sure people know that we're still very traditional. We still have a regalia. We still bead. We still do quill work. We do those sorts of things. So sharing our culture, like through Red Can, I think is a very important piece of what we're doing. Our kids they've made their regalia and then they're performing and they're sharing that. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but I feel like it's a really powerful statement for us where in South Dakota, I'll be frank, you know, I think that they would rather forget that Indians live in their state, quite honestly. So we're just making sure that they don't forget.
Yes.
In the Alliance for California Traditional Art, how do you weed out those some of those groups that would perform, as was just referenced, those that are fake culture, those that often have an underlying profit motive for their activities?
Thank you. It's a very good question. So, but we have a review panel and a panel process. And while that is not a perfect process, it's been a very, very, very good process. So we're very careful about bringing panelists together who are rooted in certain cultural traditions. So very broadly, those would be, we always have someone representing Native California. We always have someone who can speak to Africa and African diaspora, African American, Latino cultures, Asian performing arts, and usually someone who's a generalist. People come from different backgrounds. Some are very strong practitioners, others are academics, ethnomusicologists, cultural workers, but people who are steeped in a long-term commitment and study. We've taken that from the fields of folklore and ethnomusicology and anthropology, and it's not just the academics at all. So that is what helps to create rigor. The application is not an easy one either, and that we ask lots of questions like, who are your culture bearers? How did you learn what you're proposing? So besides, and that's true also for our apprenticeship program as well. So an apprentice and a master artist or culture bearer apply together, and that's sort of the cornerstone of this work, is just that intimacy, but certainly larger.
My question is for Julie. You mentioned that you run the Cheyenne River Youth Project. So what kind of leadership roles do your youth play in the Red Can Graffiti Jam?
The kids are really involved with the jam. I mean, I think that I'll be honest that the jam was something that, having grown up in the reservation, having lived there my whole life, and being a res kid to a great degree, but I know my community pretty well. And so I see, the things that are happening. And I think a lot of what I know is because of the conversations that throughout the years that I've had with kids, or I've watched them, how they interact, or I watch how they interact with staff and that sort of thing. So I think that's how my staff and we can really say that we gained our experience. We learned about ourselves really too, and the community from our kids. So the kids play a big role in Red Can in terms of throughout the year, they're involved in their internships and creating art, and they take art classes. So those sorts of things are going to be exhibited, so people will be able to see their artwork. They're also performing. You see the cultural exhibits. They also have the opportunity to paint alongside all these artists who come from all over the country. So like you saw Focus, he was talking about, like, this is one of the things they're waiting for their whole life. They really love graffiti, they love street art. So the idea and the opportunity to paint next to these artists who some consider just like the kings of that world, who are coming to our reservation, which by the way is not easy to get to. You fly to South Dakota, then you get to Rapid, and then you drive 3 hours. So it's not an easy place to get to. So the fact that they want to come there and share their gifts and then share that talent with our kids. This year we're trying to really be very, very much more intentional, where we have a Q&A with the artists and the kids, and we're trying to figure out how that's going to work, because in the end it's a 3-day festival where they're painting every single day in the park and in the community all day long. So we're just trying to make sure that the kids have access to them. Again, our 3rd year, so every year it's kind of been a little bit different in seeing how we approach where we're doing it, but the kids are very involved.
Other questions? Are there any of you out there that are finding that some of the movements that we're seeing politically, and I'm talking about, Standing Rock and Water for Life is Life and Black Lives Matter, and are these things intersecting in your communities, perhaps in your cultural communities and traditional arts, in a way that has changed And how has that, and panelists as well, has this added more juice? Has this made you retreat? Like positioning ourselves as, you know, we're turning on the TV and seeing.
So I'm from here in California, in the Bay Area. I work with older adults living in an assisted living. And many of the elders that I work with have been politically active their entire lives, and it's just their physical condition right now that's preventing that. But I found that in their seeing, observing what's going on right now, there is a renewed vigor. There's a renewed commitment to telling their stories. I have a woman who lives in our community who hasn't told the story of being in the internment camps. She hasn't told that story in 30 years. Suddenly, she wants to tell that story all the time now. She wants to put her art about that story on the walls with recognition of that story and what she and her family have been through. So I see what's going on right now and the connection of the youth in what's going on right now across all different issues and movements. It's really activating elders, and so for me it's exciting to see that life coming back and that activism coming back even in the elder community.
Thank you.
I don't know how to say what I want to say, but I feel safer saying it here. I'm from Grand Prairie, Texas, and half of our community, 49% is white, 43% is Hispanic. And I'm white, although I have a Mexican maiden name, so I'm proud of that heritage. But what I'm struggling with in the current political situation is all of our people groups are so afraid that they're trying to be too white. And it's really hard to think of how to take what I'm hearing today, which is just lovely in my heart and exciting, to think how to energize that in our community, how to reach people and say, don't be afraid, be proud. But I think there's a lot of fear. That's just a comment.
Thank you. Yes. You, and then you, yeah.
Hello. So I work a lot with youth, and I'm currently working on a project that's asking people to share stories with them that are important to them and to put those stories and make them into a tiny work of art on a 5x5 illustration board. And I'm using those boards and I'm creating a structure that reflects all those stories from communities all over, from a South Sudanese center, LGBT center, the Hispanic community where I'm from. And I was really taken away during one of our workshops when I had a child, an 11-year-old kid, like a preteen. She and her friends come up to me and they ask me, like really shyly, I could tell that they probably didn't want to ask me if it was appropriate to create their artwork in support of the LGBT community. And what really struck me about it was that these are kids who are 11, and it made me realize that there were patterns in all the stories that people were telling me, because I was getting stories that, whether they noticed or not, were reflective of some of the stuff that is in conflict with the current administration. So I have people who have given me titles about immigration and about peace and about the environment and about how we need to take care of who we are. And I was having a conversation with one of my supervisors where she kind of flat out asked me, like, has anybody mentioned the president's name? And I was like, no, because I think it's a project that's supposed to be positive, and nobody's like done anything negative, but I really see a pattern forming in all of the pictures that people are giving me, because it's everything that you see on the news.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Ellen Martin, and I'm from Monterey, and we produce festivals. We have outreach throughout the county, and we have 2 centers, one in Monterey and one in Greenfield. And Greenfield is in the heart of the migrant farming community. It is the most underserved city in the county, and that's why we're there. The largest group of Oaxacans outside of Oaxaca itself. And there's been so many challenges up and down since 2007, and then we started this cultural arts center, the old police station, just a year and a half ago. But when we first started working with the people of Greenfield and the Oaxacans who speak Triqui, they wouldn't fill out any registration forms. And it wasn't because they couldn't, it's just they didn't want anybody to know who they were. And then through the years they started to, and now again they've gone underground. And things happen to them because they lived their lives in their culture, and it doesn't always sync with the way that United States politically and law enforcement. And so that's been such a challenge and brings sadness to me when they go underground and their leader no longer is able to be their leader, and it takes them a while to get a leader to bring them together. But we did a mural last year, summer, on our center, and I was so proud that we brought How the Woman Outshowed the Sun, which is an old Oaxacan tale. So we did images and pictures and showed them to City Council, and people were outraged that we would just do one culture. So we were able to blend it to show the history of Greenfield. And now we're doing another mural on another building that is city-owned, and I was just told last week, not the culture. Don't bring the culture, bring the landscape. So we were able to blend that last year, and we're hoping to blend it again. But my question is if any of you have faced this, is helping the traditional people, the indigenous people, not to go underground and to keep coming out. Because we've done so many successful workshops. We did peace polls. They did dolls and wrote their stories about how they had to escape Oaxaca. So now we're in another transition where they're going underground again, and they're without a leader in that particular community. And we want to keep those traditions alive. We have looms. We have everything at our center now, guitars, to keep the culture alive. And to help them, and to have a safe place. That's the most important thing, right? A safe place. But they're going underground again for a number of reasons.
I can try to reflect a little bit, just hearing your words. I think the most important thing is to respect where people are at. Communities in Mexico have been, and in particular, indigenous communities that have, for lots of different reasons, retained language, retained traditions, retained practices, have been able to fight erasure because they know when their survival is at risk. And so my suggestion would be to continue to speak and dialogue with the community and ask them what is the safe space. In Puebla, where to speak your native language in Mexico is a political act, and it actually could be a marker for violence because there are so many communities that are trying to have agency and speak up. They're quickly there's the impunity with which they can be punished for that is very strong. So people know, they come to the United States and they know that. And then they see it on TV, right? They see what's happening right now. In Puebla, where the women practice the basket weaving is in each other's patios. They go to each other's houses. They don't go to a community center. They just meet up like they would regularly, 3 or 4 of them get together, they bring their materials, and they just hang out with each other. And then that's where they produce their work. I would suggest, asking like where, is it better to just work from your house? 3 or 4 of you get together and continue to do that. That is the way that our cultures have been able to survive and underground, right? Continue that resistance, and that resilience to do that is present Otherwise, you know, they wouldn't be speaking Triqui. They wouldn't be doing the things that they still do. They know how to protect and survive. Yeah.
If I could add, so it's interesting because with this year's Red Can Jam, one of the walls that we have is a city office, and I was actually asked to not put anything about culture, but we're doing it anyway in a way that she's never going to notice. So we just moved ahead. But I think that, like, where I come from, which is in South Dakota, and I think most of you probably all know about Stand with Standing Rock and No Dapple and that whole fight, I think that we're at a place in our existence where we're not going underground. We're done with that. And I think that our people are becoming more powerful, and it's becoming more powerful through arts and just, you know, more language. And, you know, like, I'm so very proud to be Lakota. I know that Jerica is, and I know we know where we come from. You know, my grandmother survived the Wounded Knee Massacre. Her grandfather was at the Battle of Little Bighorn. So we know where we come from, and we know where our strength comes from. So I think we're living in a day and age that going underground isn't something that we'll consider anymore. I think that, you know, a lot of the whole Standing Rock movement began with our youth. And one of the young men who grew up at our youth center, he's one of the founders of a group called, I think it's One Mind, One Youth Movement. They're actually the group that kind of began that whole thing. They ran from Standing Rock to the Corps of Engineers office in Washington, D.C. So I feel like, you know, in this climate, this political climate, I think you're going to see us wanting to be more Indian. We want to be more Lakota. I think that's not going to happen, especially after what's happened at Standing Rock. I think our people have made our stand. You know, we have something that we need to say, and we're going to keep saying it.
Yeah. I also wanted to respond to Ellen. You know, thank you so much for sharing that story with us, because there's so much to unpack in everything that you've said, and it just leads me back to, you know, as people involved in arts and culture, this is such value-driven and ethical work, and it's also very, very challenging, because if people need to disappear, it's a matter of survival, and there is no safety in those things that have been extremely helpful to them. And I think, just to underscore, really asking what do you need is really the basis of doing this kind of cultural work, period, without threat and certainly with perceived threats and real threats. So what does a community need? What do you need in order to flourish and to survive? And it's a learning situation back and forth, because we have our ideas of what is successful. We have our ideas that we don't even know what we're imposing until we're kind of challenged with our assumptions and can learn from our very big mistakes. So any other responses or comments? Thank you. Yeah, Erica.
I wanted to also respond. We're also going through the same thing where our people that are here legally or just have visas also want to go underground and not go to work. And what GAFU is doing, the Garifuna American Heritage Foundation United, is actually talking about the legal aspects, their rights, and informing everyone about their rights. So I think that's another component. Whether you find someone in the community who's a lawyer or who's a paralegal or who knows about the law, you know, just find somebody that the community is comfortable with to also tell them about their legal rights.
Thank you. Okay. Last comments, last questions. Yes?
Sorry. I wanted to share a success story in response to your question about political activism. I'm from Canada, where 7 or 8 years ago, there was a moccasin top beating project that helped bridge between Indigenous organizations and the broader community around the cause of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I want to apologize for my use of terminology that may be different because I'm coming from a different place. So there was a project where artists mobilized through online social networks and through their in-community social networks. First Nation artists led moccasin top beading workshops, bridging out to feminist communities and people who are not usually politically active through local communities, workplaces, public places, private homes, teaching First Nations people and non-First Nations people beading. And the moccasin tops were gathered to a central location, exhibited. Thousands and thousands of people across the country participated in this. And now, in part due to the awareness raising through that personal engagement through art making, gathering weekly to learn and think about the issues as well as learning the traditional craft. Today we have a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yes, one more.
Thank you. My name is Desiree Beltran. I'm an immigrant from Mexico. And I think right now is also the time for us to not put ourselves into boxes, not to say, well, I'm an arts administrator or I'm an artist, I'm not an activist. I think right now is also a time for us to say, what is my privilege? So I have citizenship. So if my communities or the communities that I support are going underground, how can I be brave because I have more privilege? If someone is white, how can they use that white privilege? If someone is in the role of city government, how can they use that privilege? So when communities are going underground, it's calling all of us to be brave, to use our voices when people can't use their voice, to show up when maybe they can't show up in person. So I think right now is the time for us to really say, how are we truly being allies and not just continue, like we purchase culture and we consume culture, but you can't have culture without the people. So it's a time to really, really truly ask ourselves, do we want the culture without the people? No, we don't. And so what does that require of us to continue to have the culture with the people? It includes being involved in immigrants' rights work. It includes being involved in human rights work. It includes being involved in a lot of what we term activist work. So I think right now is the time, a call for artists and arts administrators and city government to speak up and to be brave and to use our privilege and not let ourselves, with our own privilege that we have, go underground too. Because there's a tendency right now to say, oh, I can't even imagine what a mural without culture is. I don't think there's such a thing.
Right.
So if we're being asked in our administrations or in our jobs to produce culture out of nothing, that's not culture. So thank you.
Yes.
In retelling some of the things that have been successful, I'll tell you something that has been done in the state of Texas where some of you think there's probably been no success whatsoever in assimilation, recognition, and appreciation of cultures, and yet Texas would not exist but for the multiplicity of cultures that came together to create the state. It's a large state, extremely diverse in every respect. There is an event that takes place every year that's called the Texas Folklife Festival. It was produced by an organization that created an institute called the Institute of Texan Cultures. And the purpose of this festival, which is now 40 years old, is to celebrate all the cultures that created the state of Texas, not just the races, not just the ethnicities, but the cultures. The farm culture, the southern culture, the western culture, cowboy culture, if you will, and so forth. What has happened because of those different cultures and ethnicities and nationalities coming together and to creating this great festival is that many people across the state know these things exist. It has produced a foundation that even those who stray from it and tend to buy in to the negativity of today's political world can still find, because you go into any town in the state of Texas, regardless of what you think its political position is, you start scratching around on the surface of those families there, you're going to find a Czech culture or a German culture or a Native American culture of some kind, a Chinese culture right in the middle of San Antonio, for instance. And these are the things that bring us success, is knowing that we have assets that we can use. I love what was just said by the young lady, because it is time that we take advantage of our assets, not just dwell on what the problem is, which we already know, but dwell on what the solutions are. Start with the foundation of what you have and go from there.
Okay, good people. We're almost at the end. We have room for one more comment. Anybody like to say something from your own? Yeah. Yes.
I wanted to know what you do to bring the outside community to your festivals and what that looks like to be able to share the culture in a safe space for the community that needs it. Not just the artisans or the youth, but the broader community that attends your festivals.
Okay, you want to go first? I can go first. It's very quick. So in New York Tlan is one festival. There is also another festival that happens in Hartford, Connecticut, in Mexico City, and in Tlaxcala. So there's on both sides. And New York Tlan, it is a festival that is supported by several organizations, by the city, by the county, and so it has a lot of buy-in. The broader community is invited, it's also connected to a university. And so there's just a lot of interest in New York also with, there's a lot of people from Puebla in New York. So there's a lot of, and a lot of interest in the city to promote the contributions of Poblanos in New York. So over 1,000 people attend a 3-day festival with a very full program. And so, yeah, it's embraced. There's a lot of support. And so in Mexico, the communities themselves promote the festival and many times in small community centers and villages. And so it's embraced. It's an opportunity for youth, for elders to get together, and it's a community event, so they're well attended.
I think, well, for me, I think number one, I mean, it was hard to get local people to come because I think nobody really knew what a graffiti jam was. So, they're like, what's going on? The Maine's just doing something different again. So that was interesting, and that was a piece that we have to work on too. But I think that now we're kind of the first jam in Indian country. We're definitely probably the first jam in South Dakota. But I think it helps that, we're almost a 30-year-old organization. So, we have our allies and support systems. And I think people are they see that what we're doing. So a lot of I would say Jim, he's with Art South Dakota. He's coming this year. He didn't come the year before, but I think he just found out about it. So I think as the word is spreading, I think it's, we do good PRs. We reach out. Of course, I talk all the time and to everybody. So, and I believe in it. So I think it helps that, that the network I share, I'm like, you got to come, you got to come. I'm very, very encouraging to people. But I think it's just for us, it's just in our 3rd year now, people are finding out more about it and they're like, what is the Red Can Graffiti Jam? So I think that's going to help a great deal. The community, again, I said, is very excited, but our PR person is amazing. And then our allies, South Dakota Arts Council, Art South Dakota, all these people are helping us too, because I think they're seeing the value and the beauty of this initiative. So that's just kind of I think with time, it's just going to continue to grow.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Let's show appreciation for Julie and Lisa. And great appreciation to all of you who spent this time with us Sunday morning, last day of the conference. Thank you. We'll be here. The bios and contact information will be on the website afterwards. We'll make sure to get that up so you can be in touch with these good people. Thank you.
Thank you.